is why do you think those arguments align more with the Christian God than with the Jewish God?
Jesus claimed to be the great I am, who Moses met at the burning bush, and Jesus says, I am who I am. Before Abraham was born, I am. So he had the audacity to claim to be the God who Moses met on Mount Sinai. And Jesus affirms and affirms and affirms Yahweh Jehovah. So much so that he says, before Abraham was born, I am. So he's claiming to be this eternal, pre-existent God, revealing himself in human form. What do you think of that?
How can God, which is an omnipotent, omniscient being, which is beyond all human comprehension, have a body? How can he eat? How can he sleep? How can he be born? Like how can you claim to ascribe adjectives like that to God, which is infinite, which is like by definition indescribable?
You bet. If you can bake bread from scratch, I better not question whether you can toast a bagel. If he created the universe, do you think he's more than capable enough to limit himself and become a human being? Of course he can. If he creates the universe, he can choose to limit himself, self-limitation, and become a human being. It's that simple.
It's not a limitation of God's power to say that God is beyond description. It's a limitation of God's power to say that God can be described.
Oh, no, that would not be along with Moses, sir. If you claim to hold to Moses, you know very well that Moses had a revelation from God, and God described himself to Moses.
Did Moses see God?
No, nobody sees God. But God revealed himself through the burning bush.
People see Jesus, so in your view, people do see God.
No, Jesus was God limiting himself and taking upon himself human form. Many, many people saw him because he was God limiting himself, becoming a human being. And that's what Paul struggles with. Paul, the tremendous Jewish rabbi, struggles with in Philippians 2. He writes, have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking upon himself the form of a bondservant and being made in human form. So that is the claim of Christ and the claim of the eyewitnesses who walked with Christ, listened to him, saw him die, and saw him risen from the dead. That's the claim. And I agree with you, it's a hard claim. But if you can believe that God spoke to Moses through a burning bush, as well as up on Mount Sinai, you can also believe that this God who limits himself and speaks to Moses through a burning bush can also become a human being. And that's what Jesus claimed.
See, when I say God spoke, I don't mean that God opened up his mouth and spoke.
Right.
I mean that there's some sort of supernatural communication, the same way that we can kind of feel this higher plane. We have some sense of this higher plane. Mm-hmm. That's what we mean by God. That's what the Jews mean when we say God spoke. But when you say God spoke, you mean that God, or a physical manifestation of God, opened up its mouth. And I believe that it's a contradiction in terms for God to have a mouth.
Good. And he reveals himself as one God, not as many gods, but as one unique personal God. And he's personal. He's not impersonal.
Correct.
Throughout the Old Testament, God reveals, I love you. Well, it doesn't love. The robot doesn't love. The computer doesn't love. It takes a personal being to love. And throughout the Old Testament, God's personalness is revealed. I love you with an everlasting love. All the great Hebrew prophets talk about it. Isaiah, Jeremiah, as well as the minor prophets.
Personalness is the idea that God connects with each and every one of us, meaning that every single person can interface with this beautiful, everlasting entity, this infinite entity called God. And like at the same time as God is this like unknowable, untouchable thing, at the same time we can develop a uniquely personal relationship with that thing that is called God. But at the same time, that does not mean that God can have a body, can be a person, can be eaten or drank or like kind of imbibed by a physical being. Yeah.
And so you're right. You're pointing out a contradiction between the triune God of Christian monotheism versus the strict monotheism of Judaism and Islam. And you're right. There's a contradiction there, very clearly.